This season, a new hot deal has arrived at Metro. $25 a line for 4 lines with all the data you need and 4 free Samsung Galaxy A15 5G phones. Getting Metro's best deals is easy. No ID required, no activation fees. Get a new number or keep your own. It's up to you. That's 4 lines for $25 a line, plus 4 free phones. Visit a store or go online today. Only at Metro by T-Mobile.
When you join Metro Plus Tax. For a limited time and subject to change. Max 1 offer per account.
Connection, opportunity, possibility. It's what we all want. Spectrum has built a world where anything is possible, with products and services designed to work better together for a seamless connectivity experience. A connection to family and friends, a connection to education, and a connection to new opportunities. So there's no limit to how big we can dream. That's Life Unlimited. That's Spectrum.
Hello, and thank you for listening to The History of World War II podcast, episode 513, Stalingrad or Bust. Now that Sevastopol had fallen on July 4th, 1942, it was time for Army Group South to move on, to fulfill Hitler's Case Blue. This called for the taking of the oil of Baku, but so much more. While Operation Edelweiss called for Army Group A to head south for the Caucasus oil, Operation Fischreihe would have Army Group B head roughly due east towards Stalingrad, the great city on the Volga River. While covering the left or northern flank of Army Group A, taking the city named after Stalin would hurt Soviet Russia's wartime production, as it produced the T-34 tank, 27% of Russia's tractors, 4% of Russia's steel, and 7% of its munitions. This, combined with the loss of the oil, manganese, and coal in the area, would cripple Russia while strengthening Nazi Germany. 2 birds, 1 stone. But first, Rostov-on-Don had to be secured, the gateway to the Caucasus, which was certainly possible now as the fighters and bombers of Fliegerkorps 8 were free from the Crimea to assist. However, taking Rostov would not be an easy affair. The initial advance on Rostov had started back on November 17, 1941, and 5 days later, the city was captured on November 21st. But like most offenses by now on the Eastern Front, the Germans and Romanians were overextended. Even worse, as Kleist, the commander of the 1st Panzer Army, had warned Berlin, his left flank to his north was vulnerable, and worser still, his panzers were starting to freeze up due to the dropping temperatures. And sure enough, on November 27th, just 6 days after the Germans took Rostov, Lieutenant General Anton Ivanovich Lopatin attacked the 1st Panzer Army in Rostov from the north. Seeing that the 1st Panzer was about to get cut off, Rundstedt, commander of Army Group South, called for a pullback. But when Hitler, heard about this, he countermanded the retreat. Rundstedt ignored this, so lost his position. Hitler put in his place Field Marshal Walter von Reichenau. But the new man took one look at the situation and said, yeah, Rundstedt had been correct. Hitler eventually agreed, and the 1st Panzer was now settled back about 31 miles or 50 kilometers along the Meuse River. It was the first significant withdrawal by the Germans in the war. Then, winter proper came, bringing most actions here to a halt. Back to the present, again, as Fliegerkorps 8 was able to focus on Rostov completely, when the 1st Panzer Army and the 17th Army attacked again, they both made short work of the Soviet 56th Army shielding the city. Indeed, the Germans tried to surround the retreating Soviets, but their capture was limited. Rostov-on-Don fell to the invaders on July 23, 1942. Now, Case Blue was free to go ahead, though taking the Crimea had burned away valuable months of good weather. And this local German victory had occurred despite Stalin issuing his own not a single step back order on July 28th, or as he put it, Ni shagu nazda. But if anything, this had helped the Germans, as they were able to smash the defenders, now rooted in their place. As for the left flank of Case Blue, General Paulus's 6th Army, a part of Army Group B, heading for Stalingrad, was most pleased when the land here was practically made for panzers. The relatively flat steppe was ideal, as his metal beast and the half-tracks covered miles each day. By July 22nd, General Paulus was within 50 miles, or 80 kilometers, of Stalingrad, on the Volga. And just after Rostov fell, the newly designated Army Group A, commanded by Field Marshal Wilhelm List, was on the move. It was comprised of General Ewald von Kleist's 1st Panzer Army, Colonel General Richard Ruoff's 17th Army, a part of Luftflotte 4 under Wolfram von Richthofen, and the 3rd Romanian Army under General Dumitrescu. And it was heady days for Army Group A. About 100 miles or 160 kilometers southeast of Rostov-on-Don, the city of Staropol was captured on August 3rd. Other cities to the west of Staropol, closer to the Black Sea coast, were also taken. One of those was Maikop, just above the Caucasus Mountains, where vital oil refineries were working nonstop. It was captured on August 10th. Despite the delay of taking Sevastopol, perhaps this phase of Case Blue would be accomplished before winter proper set in. Perhaps Hitler was the reincarnation of Frederick Barbarossa, German king and Holy Roman Emperor of the 12th century, who was fabled to return to bring Germany to greatness. The panzers and half-tracks of Army Group A moved on, ever southeastward. Their next target was the city of Grozny on the Terek River, another, and this was vital, oil refining city. It was still roughly 300 miles or 482 kilometers away from Baku, but an important step nonetheless. The Axis forces moved on.
As a longtime foreign correspondent, I've worked in lots of places. Nowhere as important to the world as China. But these days, few journalists are able to get the inside story. That's because China has shut the door to much of the media.
Authorities have far more efficient tools to control the press, and they're far less reluctant to use them.
I'm Jane Perlez, former Beijing bureau chief for the New York Times. On Face Off, the U.S. versus China, we're trying to break through. We'll talk about Trump and Xi Jinping, AI, TikTok, and even Hollywood. New episodes of Face Off are available now, wherever you get your podcasts.
Back to the north, to Operation Vyshlaya, the taking of Stalingrad, things were equally going well here for the invaders. Of course, before this dash could be taken, the Germans had to destroy the enemy bridgehead over the Seversky Donets, just south of Kharkiv, established during Stalin's February 1942 counteroffensive. Kharkov had first been taken by the Germans in October of 1941. Reeling from this defeat, it wasn't until February 42 that the Soviets were ready to try to retake the area. Their success was limited, to say the least. But when the Germans came back in May of 42, their success was capped by 280,000 Russian casualties versus the 20,000 casualties of the Axis. And as previously covered, this set up two other offensives that saw the destruction of the Soviet 28th Army and then the pushing back of the Russian 38th and 9th Armies, setting up their drive towards Stalingrad. Again, the terrain allowed the panzers and the other vehicles of Army Group B to cover many miles each day, which allowed them to reach the outskirts of Stalingrad in late August. And given their speed, resulting in their all-too-soon appearance, the panzers would eventually enter western Stalingrad on September 1st. But this was not the beginning of the end of the defenders of Stalingrad and its people. No, this was the beginning of something else, as the first Lend Lease period had come to an end on June 30th, 1942. Starting off, the protocol of that period demanded tanks for Stalin, exactly 2,250 tanks, and FDR was determined not to fail his partner. He even had Churchill strip his North African command of tanks, which the U.S. replaced a few months later to help out. The protocol was met. To make this more digestible, here's what else Soviet Russia received by June 30th. 36,865 trucks, 6,823 jeeps, 400 scout cars, just over 2,000 rubber floats, and 167,000 tons of grain, corn, dehydrated milk, butter, meat, and Spam. So while Army Group South was pushing forward, taking from the Soviet state, its partners were replacing those losses and then some. And this does not include the 56,445 field telephones, Russia's big weakness, and the corresponding 381,431 miles of field telephone wire, and the 1,285 aircraft, both fighters and bombers. One more note, and the point will be made. 260 miles or 418 kilometers east of Moscow is Gorky, an industrial city that was making weapons, or where the factories had been moved to since the invasion. It also had a training ground, and on July 1st, 1942, the 119th Tank Brigade was formed, consisting of 44 Canadian Mk3 Valentine tanks, 15 Ford trucks, and 4 Studebakers. And these newly created tank brigades would spring up almost like flowers in spring during 1942 with each new shipment. Other brigades had the medium American Stewart M3 tanks, light Stewart M3s, Dodge, and Studebaker trucks, and British Matilda Mk2 medium tanks. It was the same with bombers and fighters, with units being created and then sent to training around Gorky. Stalin, being Stalin, thanked FDR, but ended his communication with he preferred diesels, as gasoline caught fire too easily when hit by enemy fire. Not to be outdone, FDR would reply in a few weeks, "Please know, over 1,000 tanks will leave the U.S. in August for Russia, now retrofitted to Soviet needs." As this was a modern war, for the Germans to truly take the massive city of Stalingrad, they needed to control the air, and that September, both sides threw in everything they had to dominate above. Problem was, the Germans had more. So, without hesitating, Stalin harassed both Churchill and FDR, though he was nicer to the American, saying, "Do what you have to send me planes." During the first week of October, the Soviet leader upped his game by writing, "We are willing to discard, for the time being, all the deliveries of tanks, artillery, munitions, pistols, etc. But at the same time, we are extremely in need of an increase in the delivery of pursuit planes of modern type." He wanted 800 planes a month, 500 from the U.S., 300 from Britain. Before Case Blue became official, the idea had been for the majority of Army Group South, meaning the German 6th, 17th, 4th Panzer, and 1st Panzer armies, to make for the oil fields southeast of Rostov. But that's when Hitler stepped in and split this massive force, wanting to take the Baku oil while simultaneously taking Stalingrad. Had the war for Hitler become personal? Did he really need to capture the city named after his adversary? Who can say? But the order was given. Now the German leader had to hope that his gamble would pay off. And when it became clear in Moscow that Stalingrad was also a target, Stalin appointed General Andrei Yeremenko the commander of the Southeastern Front on August 1st. His commissar would be Nikita Khrushchev, who would command the civilian administration. They were tasked with keeping Stalingrad a Soviet possession. As had happened during the battles outside Moscow, Soviet units fought the enemy just beyond Stalingrad's western edge, while other Russian armies were being assembled to the city's east, waiting for the right time to strike back. This required the sacrifice of thousands of Russian lives, but Stalin made the call. As stated, the Germans would enter the western edge of Stalingrad eventually, but they would pay a high price beforehand. The finger-shaped part of the northeast corner of the Sea of Azov almost points directly at Stalingrad, and given the geography of the region, coupled with the German forces pushing due east from Kiev, the balance of Army Group B was trying to reach the Volga to the northeast of Stalingrad. But first, they would have to cross the Don River that ran northwest of Stalingrad. Thus, the battle line was diagonal, starting in the upper left corner and heading southeast to the bottom right corner. Keeping that in mind, at the center of the German attack line, closest to Stalingrad, was General Paulus's 6th Army. To his left was the Romanian 3rd Army. To the left of that was the Italian 8th Army. To its left was the 2nd Hungarian Army. And lastly, at the city of Voronezh was General Salmuth and his 2nd German Army. To the immediate right of General Paulus's 6th Army was General Hoth's 4th Panzer Army, and to his right was the 4th Romanian Army. Now, that's not where the land ended. No, there was another 180 miles or 280 kilometers before reaching the Caspian Sea. And while the Russians did not have armies along the Volga all the way to the Caspian, they had 2 armies to the southeast of the city and 2 more armies behind them, should the Germans try to cross the Volga further southeast of the city and then go back up. It's a pity that the attackers did not have more forces to pressure this further right flank. Oh wait, they did. Army Group A, but Hitler had ordered them to make for Baku instead of trying to overwhelm the defenders of Stalingrad along the entire line. Wars are won or lost by such decisions.
Hello everyone, my name is Wesley Livesey from the History of the Second World War podcast. My podcast is a mostly chronological retelling of the Second World War, and I hope you will join me on a journey through the most cataclysmic conflict in human history, as we try to answer the questions of not just what and where, but how and why. Join me on a journey not just through the famous campaigns, battles, and events, but also on a trip around the globe as we broaden the scope of Second World War history beyond the well-known battlefields of Europe and the Pacific. During weekly episodes, I seek to provide new insight for longtime students of the war, while also being a great jumping-on point for anyone seeking a deeper understanding of the Second World War. This podcast has made it to the invasion of Poland in 1939, and start listening now to find out how the world would find itself embroiled in its second worldwide conflict in just 20 years. You can find History of the Second World War on all major podcast platforms or at historyofthesecondworldwar.com.
Pushing hard up and down the line, the Germans, with their Axis allies, were able to obtain bridgeheads over the Don River on August 20th, which brings up another geographical aspect to note. Think of Stalingrad as the center point on a piece of paper. The Volga River comes at the city from the north-northeast, and it leaves after going through the city to the southeast. The Don comes at the city, but does not make contact from the north-northwest, and it leaves to the southwest. Thus, together, these 2 rivers make a badly drawn X. So if the Axis forces to the northwest of Stalingrad managed to cross the Don River, that would put them still west of the Volga River, though north of the city, which then they would be able to approach by land. Which also means the German 6th Army, closest to Stalingrad, was still on the western side of the Don River. Back to the battle. With these bridgeheads established, the invaders crossed the Don and started pushing back the defenders, who were also trying to retreat in an orderly manner back to the city. This allowed Paulus's 6th Army, which had also crossed the Don, to approach the city from the western edge by August 23rd. Field Marshal Kleist would remember this moment of Army Group B approaching the city, because after the war, he would say, the capture of Stalingrad was subsidiary to the main aim. It was only of importance as a convenient place in the bottleneck between the Don and the Volga, where we could block an attack on our flank by Russian forces coming from the east. At the start, Stalingrad was no more than a name on the map to us. But as this battle unfolded, it would become so much more than just a name on a map. As the Axis forces had approached and then crossed the Don River to the northwest and west of the city, everything of value just west of Stalingrad was brought inside. Still, the city started to suffer from food shortages right away, as there were hundreds of thousands of soldiers to feed, not to mention the city's civilian population. And not helping, Richthofen's Luftflotte 4 managed to sink supply ships on the Volga, denying food to the city just as it was getting close. Next, German bombers would go on to destroy about 90% of the city's housing with incendiary bombs, which made little difference as the people spent most of their time in the factories, certainly the ones turning out the T-34 tanks, because they saw those as their only salvation. At this point, Stalin made another decision, proving once again he had the power of life or death over the country's citizens. When Army Group Center had been approaching Moscow in November 1941, many Muscovites left, but not Stalin. He stayed and set the tone, and it worked. But here, it would be different. The Soviet premier would not let the civilians leave for two reasons. One, he believed it would motivate his troops to fight harder to save their lives, and two, someone had to keep working in the factories. This decision would cost the lives of tens of thousands of Russians, though the numbers are heavily debated. For now, they were given shovels and pickaxes and told to go dig 6 feet deep anti-tank trenches and to cut down trees so their anti-tank weapons would have a clear field of fire. Soon, some of these people would be sent to fight the invaders with or without guns. As the Axis forces drew nearer to Stalingrad, Stalin pulled armies from all over, including Siberia, but they would take time to arrive. Further, the week before the Sixth Army entered the outskirts of the city, the Soviet Air Force, the VVS, was obliterated by Luftflotte 4. Soviet reinforcements were on their way, but for now, the invaders controlled the skies. Meanwhile, the Soviet Defense Forces readied for the coming urban warfare. They were assisted by the now trapped civilian population. Specific streets were barricaded to stop enemy vehicles from coming through. The attackers were to be channeled and then ambushed. Further, certain houses or factories became machine gun nests because, at some point, the panzers would be followed by infantry, and when that happened, they would be decimated. That was the plan anyways. Giving the defenders another advantage, as the houses were hard upon each other, holes were made in the walls, so troops could literally travel through the city or along a street without setting foot on the street. And holes were also torn into roofs, so snipers could put their skills to work against the approaching enemy. Everyone on the defender's side knew this was going to be terrible, bloody, and grueling, but the alternative was death or enslavement. Everything is relative. General Paulus, the ranking officer, made his attack plan. It was conventional. In the center would be 9 infantry divisions of the Sixth Army. To his left or northern flank on the Don River, he placed 3 panzer and 2 motorized infantry divisions. To his right or southern flank along the Volga, he had 2 panzer and 2 motorized divisions, and he currently had more men than did the defenders. But as we will see, this battle on both sides would soon have the stamp of their leaders, Hitler and Stalin. Hitler, using radios, would hear of the attacks on a regimental level and make suggestions, which, of course, were not suggestions. As for Stalin, he had placed General Andrei Yeremenko in command of the defending forces, but as was his wont during a crisis, he would then place a trusted commander over the local commander. In this instance, it would be Georgy Zhukov, the man who had successfully defended Moscow. Marshal Zhukov was ruthless, if only to maintain his position and his life. Stalin wanted him to be just as ruthless with the enemy. Greetings, everyone, from Central Virginia. So for those of you out there who are like me, who are suffering from yet another cold dip, snowstorm, whatever, hang in there. It's got to end sometime, right? That's what I keep telling myself. Anyways, so I would just like to say welcome aboard to the latest member, Reed Leslie of Pasadena, California. Thank you very much, Reed. It is so appreciated. Nothing on the donations, but hey, I guess I can buy my own beer. Yeah. Anyway, so just joke. So yeah, now we're going to kind of balance out between Stalingrad and what's going on to the south. Obviously, the stuff to the south it's not going to go much further. I hope that's not a spoiler. So that'll give us a chance to focus on Stalingrad, and we'll at least get through the end of 1942, and then maybe check out some of the other spots on the Eastern Front, or we'll just stick with it and let it run its course. Maybe that's the way to go. Feel free to email me if you have. If you want to see it go one way or the other, and we'll just see how it goes. And we'll just see how, again, just the grinding down of one of the, it has to be said, greatest fighting forces in the world. But yeah, they're about to learn many, many valuable lessons the hard way. Take care, everyone.
I'm Dr. Samuel Hume, and I'm here to tell you about my new podcast, Winds of Change. Winds of Change is the story of how the sun set on the British Empire. This first season is on British India, and in these weekly episodes, we'll cover the whole history through to the final days of the Raj in 1947. If you love learning about the past and discovering why the world is the way it is, then listen to Winds of Change. You can listen to Winds of Change on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere you find great podcasts.